Hello and welcome to another episode of Katie the Science Lady. I'm Mrs. Jacobson, and today we're talking about trophic levels and food webs. So let's learn together. All right, so we are going to talk about trophic levels and food webs today. Usually by this point in time, if you're learning about trophic levels and how energy flows through an ecosystem, you've already learned about food chains. But if you haven't, you may want to watch that first. If you haven't, that's okay. You can still pretty much get an introduction to it here, but you may want to watch other videos to kind of help with that base as well. So we have to quickly talk about a couple of key terms, producers and consumers. And they are what they sound like. Producers make things and consumers consume things or eat things. And that's what the difference is. Producers are going to be what we think of as plants. They take energy from the sun and they turn it into sugar called glucose. This is why fruit tastes sweet. It's why some things, I think carrots taste sweet. Most people disagree with me, but they taste sweet to me. All those plants, they have sugar in them. Producers are also called autotrophs. If we break that word down, auto means self, and troph is talking about energy. So they make energy themselves. Consumers are heterotrophs, meaning that they need to get energy from other places, either other consumers, like if a human eats chicken, that's consuming another consumer, or if I eat like carrots, again, I'm eating a producer. So you have to eat something else to get energy if you are a heterotroph, and that's what we are. In this picture here, we've got in this picture, we've got a producer, it's grain. We've got a plant. So this would be creating glucose by using sunlight. And again, that process is photosynthesis. So that's what producers use to make their sugar. And these little tiny adorable field mice, they would be heterotrophs because they're going to eat that wheat, which is a plant. It's a producer. So they're going to consume it and eat it for energy. If we look at it as a simple chain, primary consumers eat producers. So producers are at the bottom, they're plants. Primary consumers, like those mice, they're going to eat grass, wheat, things like that. They're going to eat producers. Secondary consumers, like maybe a snake would eat a mouse, that's a secondary consumer. So the snake is eating the primary consumer, which the primary consumer already ate the producer. So secondary consumers eat primary consumers. Tertiary consumers would be like a hawk. A hawk might eat a snake. A snake would be a secondary consumer. The snake, again, eats the mice, which are primary consumers, which eat the grass, which are producers. So it just makes kind of a chain effect. If it gets higher than that, you could have quaternary consumers. If for some reason humans decided to eat a hawk, they could, and they would be the quaternary consumer in that little chain. They just eat the one that comes before them, basically. We are going to look at a chain like that in a minute, but that's basically just as you go up, you add a level of the consumer. A couple other things, detritivores are consumers. They eat dead and decomposing things. So I like to think of them kind of as scavengers, because examples of detritivores are things like vultures. Even possums could be, raccoons could be, depending on what they're eating. But they are going to be scavengers, and they will eat things that are already dead or things that are already decomposing. So we call that detritus, and that's where detritivores comes from. I know for a lot of my students, it gets kind of confusing, so they have to think of detritivores and they think of scavengers. We put them on the flashcard together so they can think of both words being the same thing. Decomposers are slightly different than detritivores. They are still eating dead and decomposing things, but it's decaying matter. So at this point, it's things that are really just already dead. And they're bacteria and funguses that are breaking them down. For me, the difference between these two things is that decomposers are absorbing the molecules. They don't eat it. They're simply absorbing the nutrients as they break down. Detritivores physically eat dead things. So for me, that's the difference. And it kind of helps me remember that because decomposers, they are just literally helping things to break down. So bacteria, funguses, they don't have mouths. So they have to just break things down and absorb all those nutrients. So that's the difference for me. Here, a detritivore, an example, would be a worm. That's why worms, they eat things that are in the dirt and they kind of churn it up and they help create some differences in the dirt for us or the soil. And decomposers are things, especially like mushrooms. Those are one of the easiest examples of decomposers to think about. And these ones look really pretty. So I liked finding a picture of these orange pretty mushrooms. Still, don't eat mushrooms if you don't know exactly where they come from, because you can get sick. So that's your little PSA on mushrooms today. All right. Going through a basic flow of energy in an ecosystem, it starts out as sunlight. That is a huge key to remember. We all get our energy from the sun. So even though you're not consuming sunlight when you go into the fridge, all of the food that you're eating originally got its energy from sun, or from the sunlight. So that's what we're looking at here. It gets passed on from one trophic level to the next, from producer to primary consumer to secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and so on, as food energy. This is only about 10% of the total energy. So not all of the energy from, let's say, our carrots, because I'm using that as an example. I had carrots for lunch today. So not all of the energy from that food source gets passed on. Only 10% does, because the other 90% is used by the organism to grow and do its normal organism activities. And it's also released as heat into the atmosphere. Right now, as I sit here, if I put my hand close enough to my body, I can feel heat coming off of my body. That is, I'm burning energy that I ate for lunch, and it's creating heat in my body to keep me alive. So I'm losing energy right now as heat into my ecosystem. So that's where the other 90% goes. Energy does not get recycled. That energy is lost as heat, and it does not go back into the soil. So energy is constantly coming from the sun. It's like it's not quite a cycle. It's really just like a big U-turn, I guess. It goes from the sun into the earth, our plants, to us, and then out. Gets lost. This is a very small picture, but I can kind of help you see what it is. We've got the sun up here. Our producers at the bottom, they capture energy from the sun. And then as different consumers eat that producer, they have lots of energy that's lost. So all these squiggly lines here on the side, that's energy being lost as heat. So again, 90% of that energy is lost as heat. Only 10% is passed on. That's a huge key, by the way. For trophic levels and energy flow, 10% is passed on, and 90% is lost. All right. And again, our mitochondria, that's our organelle that's going to do cellular respiration for us, and it produces that heat. So it's us taking our energy, using our energy to make, using our glucose or sugar to make energy, ATP energy for us, and that's going to get used up. So that 90% is that used energy. Looking at a simple kind of chain of energy flow here, looking at a food chain. We can look at food webs all we want. They're just complicated food chains. But we're looking at the flow of energy from one trophic level to another, to another, to another. And in this case, we are looking at a couple of different things. This food chain here, it shows one pathway. It's not always this easy. That's why we use food webs more often. But I wanted to give you guys a quick example of a food chain before we make it more complicated. So if we look at this, the arrows are pointing in one direction. So you're not going to have arrows going two ways. For example, this snail is going to be eating this plant. The plant does not eat the snail. You have to have the energy flowing in the right way, or you're telling me that a plant is eating something, which normally is not the case. And again, normally. So over here we have, this looks like a desert flower. If we were to fill in this box, think about what it would be. I feel like I'm doing Blue's Clues. It would be a producer. So it's a plant, it will be a producer. As we move through the different levels, we are going to move up to a primary consumer with this snail. And then as we go, we just tack on an extra number, basically. So our bird here, this sparrow, finch, I don't know quite what bird it is, I'm not a bird person. This is a secondary consumer. And then our hawk over here, or looks kind of like a falcon, would be a tertiary consumer, or third level. Sometimes you'll see first level, second level, third level, but you may also see primary, secondary, and tertiary as your terms. Food webs, they are much more complicated, and they are more accurate to showing our ecosystem as a whole and how energy flows through it. Organisms can be more than one type of consumer because sometimes they eat more than one type of thing. For example, if I'm eating a burger, sorry, little cow on this slide, I do like burgers. I'm eating plants because I like to have pickles on my burger. I like to have lettuce on my burger. Don't judge me. So I have my plants, my producers. So I'm eating producers. In that way, I'm a primary consumer because I'm eating producers, but I'm also eating this cow, and a cow eats grass. So if I eat the cow, I'm a secondary consumer. So when I eat this burger, I'm not only eating producers, but I'm also eating consumers. So I'm falling into more than one level myself if I eat a burger. And that's what we see here in this food web. We can start with things like plankton. That's going to be our producer in this food web. So it's always important, in my opinion, if you have a food web in front of you, I always circle the producers first. I'll take a look at it. I'll just circle producers. Anything that's a plant, I will circle that because then I know where to go from that point. So either if I highlight it, underline it, circle it, I make sure that I note where the producer is because after that point, it gets a lot easier to figure out what things are. So if a plankton is a producer here, the tadpole and the daphnia, very tiny things here, those are going to be primary consumers. Now you see the tadpole, it eats the plankton, but it also eats the daphnia. So the tadpole is also a secondary consumer. It's a little complicated, but as you kind of look through this, you'll catch on. So again, it's plankton is our producer. The tadpole eats the plankton, so it's a primary consumer. The daphnia eats the plankton, primary consumer. But the tadpole also eats the daphnia, which makes the tadpole, it eats a primary consumer. That makes it a secondary consumer. Okay. The last thing we need to take a look at are these energy pyramids. A lot of times this is how we show trophic levels. We don't often show them with the food webs. But energy pyramids, they are used to show energy flow, population size, biomass, lots of different things. It takes a larger number of individuals, and the majority of the time that's like blades of grass or flowers or whatever, at the bottom to feed a few things at the top. So it takes a lot more producers to feed a single consumer at the top of the pyramid. I'll kind of go through what that means. So if we look here, we have 100% primary producers. As we go up a level every time, remember only 10% of the energy passes on. So you need to consume more if you're at the very top of the primary producers to get more energy. So we have to have a wider base for our pyramid or more producers in order to feed consumers because they have to eat more of it. If you had a diet of only vegetables, you would have to eat way more vegetables to get the same amount of calories than you would if you were just eating beef. So if I were to have a steak, it has probably at least 3 times the calories as if I had a piece of celery. That's a bad example. Celery has maybe a couple of calories. Beef would have several hundred. So I'd have to eat a lot of celery to make up the same energy content as having a steak. So you'd have to eat a lot more producers to equal the energy content you'd get from eating something higher up. The pyramid of biomass is also kind of similar to this. As you go up in the trophic levels, or in the consumer levels, basically, you need less space. So if you're down here at the bottom, you need more space, more just a higher amount of the organism. So if we are talking about grass, you have to have a lot of grass to feed the consumers above it. So this is why you don't have a cow in a pasture that's the size of a living room. They wouldn't have enough grass there to feed them. They're instead these huge pastures, acres and acres of space, because they need a lot of primary producers. They need a lot of their greens to feed them. So you have just a larger amount in general at the bottom of the pyramid. And the last one is the pyramid of numbers. Again, it's the same idea. So you have to have physically a higher number of producers to feed a smaller number of consumers. Because if I was trying to eat tomatoes, I would need to eat more tomatoes than one of me. So I'd have to have, I don't know, if I was trying to just eat tomatoes for one day, I'd have to eat like 50 of them to get enough energy, as opposed to just feeding one of me. So you need a lot more things at the bottom of your pyramid to feed a few at the top.
All right, guys, let's review some of today's major keys. All energy in an ecosystem comes originally from the sun, and producers capture this energy in photosynthesis and turn it into sugar or energy from themselves. Consumers like you and me have to either eat plants, eat producers to get this energy, or we have to eat other consumers so we can take their energy. In addition, decomposers break down decaying matter, and detritivores, which are also called scavengers a lot of the time, they eat dead and decomposing matter. So there's a slight difference between what those two things do. As far as trophic levels go, we already talked about how energy enters our system as sunlight. That's the main form of energy. 10% of that energy is passed on at each level of our kind of trophic level pyramid. But the main thing that happens in this pyramid, you might be wondering, where does that other 90% go? And it's lost. So when we do normal activities, when we breathe out, when we're expending this energy, we lose 90% of this energy as heat and normal body activities. But you'll usually just see it referred to as heat. And that's it for today. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. And as always, I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you later.